Hi, welcome back to Conversations with Kanyomozi. My name is Lisa Kanyomozi Rebuni, and today we're talking trauma. So, this week, unfortunately, I was made to revert back to a traumatic event through an article I read and an article I had to write. And I just thought, how do people deal with trauma? Or I was thinking back to experiences of my friends and how they've had to deal and cope with trauma. And then someone else said something about trauma being misused. So I said, let's talk about that conversation. Let's have a conversation about that. To begin with, the official definition of trauma is psychological trauma is damage to the mind that occurs as a result of a distressing event. Trauma is often a result of an overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds one's ability to cope or integrate the emotions involved with the experience. So things like accident, domestic abuse, violence, sexual violence, assault, rape, and so on can be causes of trauma. There's other things you might think of, so broaden the scope. There's different types of trauma, which I did not know. I think I've been a victim to each in different phases. So let's unpack that. There's acute trauma that comes from one single event. There is chronic trauma that comes from a prolonged event. For example, bullying or child abuse or domestic abuse that has happened over a long period of time. Then there's complex trauma that comes from multiple traumas. Now, I think I have gone through all the stages and we're now at complex trauma. Trauma manifests differently for certain people. I remember after an event where I was sexually assaulted in downtown Kampala, the event itself was traumatic to me, but it triggered something that had happened before. And for a long period of time, if there was a man walking behind me, for example, I would have a panic attack. Like once I would break down and start crying in the middle of town, in the middle of the road, or whatever it was. So trauma manifests differently for different people. So if you have had a certain event, and when you talk about it or you hear a certain song or a certain movie that might have happened during that time, or a certain smell, it wakes that up, or when you pass a certain venue, that could be something that is tied to your trauma, okay? And finally, obviously, we're not just going to talk about things, but what can we do for trauma? Number one thing that I learned with my traumatic events, give it time. There's things that happened to me in 2013 or 2012 that I feel like I've healed from, and then something will happen and it will happen. The feelings that I had in 2012 will come back right now. So give it time. It may not take 5 years, it may not take 10 years, it may not take 20 years, but don't be too hard on yourself when it hasn't healed in the moment. Number two, find out what happened. Something very traumatic happened to me in 2016, and for 2 years I refused to understand the details of that conversation. But for me to be able to heal from that trauma or to walk around coping better with that trauma, I had to figure out what happened, how it happened, why it happened, who it happened with. I had to understand the details so that I can be able to heal from the situation. The third thing is find other survivors. Find other people who are understanding of what you're going through, who will hold you, who won't say, I think you're overly dwelling on this situation, because they understand that this is something that needs time. Number four, support. It can be in therapy, it can be in friends, it can be in colleagues, it can be in family, whatever it is. Find support. People who are going to understand, people who are going to listen to you and not get tired of listening to you. Finally, talk it over. One of the things that I had to do when I was unpacking a sexual trauma that happened in 2016 was talk to my friends about it, because for the longest time I wanted to keep it in, but me talking about it was me acknowledging that it had happened and I need to heal from it. If I kept it in, it would continue to harm me or hurt me. But this works differently for different people. Did you know what trauma was? Are there any traumas you're facing and you'd like to share right here in the comment section? How do you cope with your trauma? That could be something that you could share with us down below. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Conversations with Kanyomozi. If you like my head wrap and accessories, Obanire is the plug.